I watched the entire Tutenstein cartoon. It's insane! So imagine this. You're just a regular 12-year-old schoolgirl on a museum trip. And then, out of nowhere, you accidentally awaken the mummified body of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutenstein, who has been lying in his coffin for almost 3,000 years. But instead of a mighty ruler, you're faced with a strange child. I mean, you don't expect something like that to jump out of a sarcophagus every day, right? So get ready, because this is going to be one of the most unbelievable and hilarious adventures ever. The show begins with Cleopatra, a girl fascinated by ancient Egyptian history, and her cat Luxor, who accidentally resurrects Tutenstein. In the process, Luxor gains the ability to speak and becomes Tut's advisor. Meanwhile, Set, the god of chaos, learns of Tut's return and seeks to seize the war's scepter to obtain absolute power. After Set's minions attempt to steal the scepter, Tut explains that Set was punished for attacking Osiris. He was banished to the darkest pit of the Egyptian underworld. The team fends off the attack using clever tactics and seals the gate between worlds with the scepter, forming a strong team. A new tomb appears in the museum with Tut's personal belongings, and an old man, fearing a curse, warns of the dangers of opening it. The museum staff ignores his warning, and he uses a relic to summon the ancient crocodile god Amut, who starts hunting Tut. To get rid of Amut, Tut undergoes a purity test and successfully passes. Amut is forced to retreat, while Cleo disguises herself to divert media attention from the museum, ending the adventure on a positive note. The next day, Professor Bedeti assigns Cleo to clean the museum before an upcoming exhibition, as reporter Rosalie is scheduled to interview him. Tut, not wanting Cleo to do all the work, casts a spell to bring dolls to life to help with the cleaning. Meanwhile, Bedeti notices that Tut is missing from his sarcophagus, and Tut rushes to get rid of the animated dolls and return to the coffin before anyone else notices. Luckily, everything works out fine, and Cleo and Tut cover their tracks. Feeling out of place in the modern world, Tut decides to use magic to bring everything back to ancient Egypt. However, his spell backfires, and chaos ensues. The ancient Egypt he creates turns out to be flooded. To Tut's surprise, this Egypt is no easier to navigate, leading to even more problems. In the end, Tut decides to use magic once again to restore the world to its normal state, bringing everything back to the modern era. Tut becomes obsessed with movies and wants to stay up late, watching them with Cleo. He asks Ra, the sun god, to delay the sunrise, but this accidentally stops time altogether. Tut realizes his mistake and sets off to find Ra. He discovers that Set, still aiming to seize the scepter, has trapped Ra with the help of Apep, and he uses his magic to free him. Ra defeats Set and everything returns to normal. Tut gets angry when he realizes he doesn't have his own pyramid, and his frustration accidentally summons Hathor, the goddess of love. Unfortunately, Hathor's uncontrolled powers cause destruction, making her a serious threat. Cleo and Tut work together to create a potion that restores Hathor to her normal self. Hathor apologizes for her actions and uses her powers to repair the damage. As a gesture of goodwill, Cleo asks Hathor to build a small pyramid in the museum in Tut's honor, which not only makes Tut happy but also attracts many visitors to the museum. Tut falls in love with Cleo's best friend Natasha and decides to summon Bess, the protector of children, to cast a love spell on her. However, the spell spirals out of control, and Tut begins to question whether his feelings for Natasha are genuine or just an illusion. After much thought, Tut decides to break the spell, realizing that he and Natasha have little in common, and Natasha never even finds out what happened. Tut accompanies Cleo on her trip to Memphis, Tennessee, hoping to find statues built in his honor, but he is left disappointed. He gets furious when he encounters modern musicians calling themselves kings. In a fit of rage, Tut accidentally splits into two spirits, Ka and Ba, both resembling him, but with opposite personalities, one kind and the other moody. Cleo discovers that Tut must reunite these spirits with his body before sunset, or he will die. A race against time begins as Ka and Ba create chaos in Memphis. In the end, they manage to catch Ka and Ba and merge them back into Tut's body, saving him from imminent death. Tut's coffin is placed in storage, and he temporarily moves in with Cleo. Cleo's mother, Iris, leaves town, leaving Cleo and her grandfather to deal with Tut's antics. Tut starts remodeling the house in an ancient Egyptian style, causing chaos. Cleo realizes she needs to return the house to its original state before Iris comes back. Just in time, Tut calls on an ancient friend to reverse the changes. He apologizes to Cleo for not respecting her home, and the situation is resolved. Tut cheats in a game of Senet against the Egyptian goddess Isis, and she summons a ghost to punish him. To his surprise, the ghost turns out to be an old friend from his past, who shows Tut the consequences of cheating. Given a second chance to play against Isis, Tut decides not to cheat even though he has the opportunity. He loses the game but earns the goddess's respect for his honesty. As a result, he returns to his friends, having learned the value of fair play. When Cleo catches a cold, Tut panics, thinking she's dying. In his worry, he takes her to an ancient Egyptian doctor, believing she needs immediate treatment. Despite Cleo only having a common cold, the doctor insists she is near death and forces her to choose her own burial wrappings. As Cleo finds herself trapped in a coffin, the team scrambles to save her. Eventually, Cleo's fever breaks thanks to medicine, but Luxor ends up catching the cold instead. In the museum, a new security system accidentally awakens Tut, who in his anger destroys it. Unbeknownst to him, this helps two thieves steal the crown of Geb, as its security alarm was also disabled. Tut uses his scepter to track the crown to a warehouse and summons Geb, the god associated with it, but Geb cannot return until a spell is recited at the museum. When the thieves return and steal the spell, Geb helps Tut and his friends stop them. Tut recites the spell, allowing Geb to reclaim the crown. The thieves are arrested and all stolen artifacts are returned. Tut, feeling unappreciated for his good deeds, is surprised when Cleo throws him a coronation party. However, the celebration is interrupted when Set's followers steal the Waz scepter. Tut ventures into the underworld to retrieve it. There, he discovers that the stolen scepter is a fake, while the real one remains in his possession. Set attempts to prevent their return, but Tut uses the power of the scepter to escape back to his world, giving Cleo the fake scepter and foiling Set's plan. During a school field trip to the museum, two bullies catch Tut's attention, and he befriends them, leading to mischievous antics. Despite Cleo and Luxor's warnings, Tut continues to cause trouble. As a result, he is taken to the Hall of Two Truths for judgment. Facing punishment, Cleo and Luxor intervene, demonstrating their loyalty. Their efforts lead to all charges being dropped, and Tut realizes the true value of friendship. When a new mammoth statue in the museum attracts more attention than Tut's sarcophagus, he becomes jealous and banishes the mammoth to the underworld. Cleo, who had worked hard on the exhibit, is upset by his actions. Tut takes her to the underworld to retrieve the statue, but they encounter two demons fighting over its possession. Tut cleverly manipulates the demons into turning against each other, creating an opportunity for escape with the mammoth. When Tut accidentally uses an ancient scroll, his shadow separates from his body and shadows start threatening his existence. Tut, Cleo, and Luxor set out to recover the lost shadows before sunset, but a Shadow Eater emerges from the underworld. When the Shadow Eater devours all the shadows, the team follows it into the underworld, where Tut tricks the creature into eating its own shadow, defeating it. Cleo uses the scroll to restore all shadows, and everything returns to normal. Tut meets Cleo's little cousin, Thomas, at the museum, and while babysitting him, he accidentally loses him in the underworld. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the group embarks on a mission to rescue Thomas. However, things take a turn when a demon mistakes Thomas for Tut and presents him to Set. Tut is prepared to surrender the scepter to save the boy, but the scepter reacts against Set when he grabs it. Set is defeated, and Thomas is safely returned home. One day, Tut decides Luxor needs help with chores and hires a new baboon servant named Hedgewar. However, Hedgewar proves to be too efficient, making Luxor feel useless. When Hedgewar's actions spiral out of control, it is Luxor who ultimately saves the day. Tut realizes he truly values Luxor as a loyal companion and dismisses Hedgewar. In the end, they reconcile. Tut, desiring power, summons Horus, the sky god, who initially refuses him, but is eventually convinced to grant Tut divine abilities. Tut uses his newfound powers, but this angers Set, who attempts to lure him into the underworld. Horus intervenes, and with Tut's help, they defeat Set's demons. In the end, Tut asks Horus to take back his powers, but Horus allows him to keep the Eye of Vision as a reminder. Tut wants to watch an adult movie, but his childlike appearance prevents him from entering the theater. Even attempting to get into a club fails. Frustrated, he breaks his ankle, returns to his sarcophagus, and unexpectedly ages. As an adult, he finally watches the movie and dances at the club, but the next day he wakes up even older. Fearing he might not wake up again, Cleo seeks Atom's help, who repairs the ankle, restoring Tut to childhood. Cleo wants to spend time with Luxor, but Tut, feeling jealous, accidentally switches their bodies. While Tut searches for a reversal spell, a goddess appears and takes Cleo away. Tut explains the situation and the goddess restores everything to normal, but decides to keep Luxor in her feline paradise. Cleo and Tut stage a daring rescue, and the goddess, seeing their bond, allows Luxor to return. When Tut is kidnapped by Set's demons, Cleo disguises herself as him to avoid suspicion. In the underworld, Tut, without the scepter, is presented before Set, who sends his minions to retrieve the scepter. Cleo, using the scepter, accidentally opens a portal, allowing demons to enter. She lures them into a trap and sets off to rescue Tut. Cleo finds Tut, turns the demons against Set, and returns the scepter to Tut, allowing him to escape back to the real world. On Halloween, Tut learns about trick-or-treating and summons a demon to scare Cleo's friends. However, things don't go as planned, and the entire group ends up in the underworld. Cleo's friends are chased by the demon, and Tut calls upon 3 vengeful ghosts who had been wronged by the demon in the past. The ghosts drag the demon away, and the group returns to the real world, believing everything was just special effects. Despite Luxor's warnings, Tut is more interested in skateboarding than the Sacred Zed Festival. Cleo learns that missing the festival will strip Tut of his scepter's powers and his right to rule, potentially allowing Set to seize control. She warns Tut, and he makes it to the festival just in time, but must complete the trial without the scepter's powers. Set tries to interfere, but Tut uses his skateboarding skills to finish the trials and retain his power. Tut raises the temperature in the museum, leading to enormous utility bills. To cut costs, Bedetti hires Gorman, who steals valuable artifacts. Bedetti is blamed for the theft and imprisoned, while Gorman becomes the new chairman. Cleo gathers evidence against Gorman but gets caught. Tut uses the scepter to scare Gorman and his gang. In the end, Gorman is arrested, Bedetti is freed, and Tut learns not to push his problems onto others. When security guard Jacob is nearly fired for being incompetent, Tut uses Thoth's scroll to grant him unlimited knowledge. However, Thoth discovers this and sends his minions to capture Jacob, believing he stole the spell. Tut takes the blame, and Thoth restores Jacob to his original state. Tut, longing for his human life, summons the goddess Isis to give him a regeneration spell. Ignoring her warnings, Tut uses the spell and becomes human again. Enjoying life, he accidentally resurrects a dinosaur and turns Cleo and Luxor into skeletons. The T-Rex, influenced by Set, tries to steal the scepter, but its tiny arms make it difficult. In an act of self-sacrifice, Tut shatters the Ankh, reversing the chaos and restoring everything to normal. One day, Tut insults the Egyptian gods, prompting them to punish him. Meanwhile, Apep, seeking revenge for Tut's past interference, plans an attack. Without his powers, Tut becomes an ordinary child, and Cleo convinces him to apologize to the gods. When he sincerely repents, the gods restore his powers and banish Apep. Cleo creates copies of the Scepter of You for an exhibition, but Tut loses the real one. Guard Jacob finds it in the freezer and keeps it for himself. Seth discovers this and sends demons to retrieve the scepter, leading to comical situations. In the end, Toot gets the scepter back and banishes the demons. Toot decides to split his body to do several things at once. However, Seth uses this to steal parts of his body and demand the scepter in exchange. Cleo finds all the parts except for the head, which is held by Seth. She goes to the underworld, and together they rebuild Toot. Seth sends another servant to retrieve the scepter, but Tut, wanting to prove his fearlessness, ignores the threat. He turns Laxator into a beast and hunts the mammoth, leading the group to find themselves in the underworld without the scepter. Laxator stays in the real world and protects the scepter while Cleo and Toot fight Seth's forces. Toot admits that he's not so fearless and asks Raz for help. Raz teleports them back to the real world. Tut can't sleep and reveals that he had a snake named Fang that helped him sleep. Cleo buys him a snake, but Seth gets possessed by it to steal the scepter. Tut thinks Cleo is jealous, but she reveals the truth. At the end, Toot exorcises the demon and learns to trust his friends. Toot feels left out at Cleo's bachelorette party and tries to sneak into it. When he succeeds, Cleo says it's for girls only, so Toot decides to have a male party. Things get out of hand, however, and Cleo steps in to save the day. They make up at the end. Seth tries to take possession of the scepter by inhabiting the famous researcher Dr. Vanderwill. She creates forged documents claiming Tut was never a pharaoh, and Professor Behdati decides to remove Tut's exhibit. Cleo reveals that Vanderwill has been possessed, and the group travels to the underworld to retrieve the scepter. Vanderwill is freed from her control, and the auction is cancelled. An exhibit about Vikings appears at the museum, and Toot decides to create an army of his own. He summons Sekhmet, who gives him 2 allies and 2 Viking enemies. However, Toot cannot control the Vikings, and they begin to wreak havoc. Sekhmet advises Toot to find inner strength, and he deftly defeats the Vikings. Cleo finds the Mirror of Isis, an artifact her father has been searching for. Using the mirror, she is transported back in time with Toot to find her father. However, this turns out to be a trap by Seth, and they end up in his temple. The group destroys the temple and returns home, and Toot promises to find out what happened to Cleo's father. I watched the entire Tutenstein cartoon. It's insane!